Benedict believed in nothing harsh, nothing burdensome. So he was not creating an ultra-ascetic rule. He was creating something that, based on his understanding of human nature, that people could actually successfully do. I'm going to read you a few of the introductory passages. This message of mine is for you then, if you're ready to give up your own will once and for all, and armed with the strong and noble weapons of obedience to do battle for the true King, Christ the Lord. That's in the prologue. He talks about the Lord waits for us daily to translate into action as we should his holy teachings. So that was part of his focus, which was how do we lead a more Christ-like life. What is not possible to us by nature, because he certainly agreed that a man was sinful. What is not possible to us by nature, let us ask the Lord to supply by the help of his grace. If we wish to reach eternal life, even as we avoid the torments of hell, then while there is still time, while we're in this body and have time to accomplish all these things by the light of life, we must run and do now what will profit us forever. Therefore, we intend to establish a school for the Lord's service. In drawing up its regulations, we hope to settle down nothing harsh, nothing burdensome, never swerving from his instructions. He's talking about God's, not his. Never swerving from his instructions then, but faithfully observing his teachings in the monastery until death. We shall through patience share in the sufferings of Christ, that we may also deserve to share in his kingdom for his monks. So, let's look at some of the precepts of Benedict's rule. There was a 12-month novitiate. So you wanted to become a monk in one of his monasteries. You basically were on probation for the first 12 months. Abolition of private property. We'll see the actual quote in a moment, but he considered this the key thing if you were going to live in a monastic environment, that you would give up all private property. Communal meetings of the abbots and the monks. This was later to be known as chapter house in the Middle Ages. If any of you, by the way, ever watched, Gene has, I know, the Brother Cadfael series that was written by Ellis Peters, the books, and then it was on PBS over the years. He plays a Benedictine monk, and you see him in chapter meetings. It was said of Brother Cadfael that he could sleep through a chapter meeting, but anytime he was called on, he could immediately reply with a coherent answer on whatever had been asked. Communal sleeping arrangements, so they slept dormitory style. This was different than, say, the Carthusians that each had their own little cell. This is a biggie. Division of the day into 7 offices. So lauds, prime, terce, sex, nuns, vespers, and compline. And this is why monks essentially would get up in the middle of the night to do the office, and then they would go back to sleep, and then they would get up 4 hours later to do another office. And that's really, he's the one that started this. They did have excommunication. It was in degrees. You were supposed to practice humility. And this is important too, is the importance of manual labor. He agreed with Paul that if you don't work, you don't eat. He also thought that monks who were entirely focused on prayer and reading Augustine and that sort of thing would eventually become disconnected from the rest of humanity. And he thought that was a bad thing. You would lose your humility, you would lose your connection to humanity. So he preached prayer and work. Later in the Middle Ages, in some of the bigger houses, not just Benedictines, also Cistercians and others, they would get so big and so rich that the monks would stop doing any manual labor, and they would bring in people called lay brothers to work in the fields while they themselves contemplated greater things. But that was not in Benedict's early obedience. In time, it was said monks needed to practice obedience, poverty, and chastity. And so we see the beginnings of that here. They would always have a reading accompanying the meals. During the meals, you were supposed to be silent, and there would be someone up on the lectern, and they would be intoning, usually in very dry terms. They would be reading passages from the Bible, they'd be reading passages from Augustine, etc., etc. Rule by an abbot, and the abbot He is believed to hold the place of Christ in the monastery since he is addressed by the title of Christ. As the apostle indicates, you have received the spirit of adoption of sons by which we exclaim, Abba, or Father. So sometimes you hear, like the Pope, for example, is known as the Vicar of Christ. So same thing in a monastery. The abbot was the figure of Christ in the monastery. You were supposed to practice self-control at all time. Silence is enforced all the time, except that there were some exceptions, like the chapter house, who were allowed to talk. Laughter and gossip were forbidden. So these were not places where you yucked it up. Some positions within the community were defined in addition to the abbot. You had a cellier, who was the supply officer. You had the prior, who was second in command of the abbot. You had a porter, who took charge of the guest lodge.